One more thing and I'm done. And another thing, used to keep secrets from me. Used to go do stuff, give people money and shit. Wouldn't tell me shit. Used to lie to me.
What if I told you that a single Facebook post could become someone's final message to the world? That in the age of social media, jealousy doesn't just simmer behind closed doors anymore. It explodes across digital platforms for everyone to witness. On a quiet Sunday afternoon in October, family members scrolled through their feeds and stumbled upon something that made their blood run cold. A video post so disturbing, so filled with rage and desperation, that they knew immediately someone was about to die. This isn't just another story about domestic violence. This is about how our digital age has transformed jealousy into a weapon of mass destruction. In 2023, we live in a world where our most private emotions become public spectacles, where a husband's rage can be broadcast live, where a wife's fear can be documented in real time, and where family members become unwilling witnesses to tragedy unfolding on their phone screens. Digital jealousy isn't just about checking someone's messages or stalking their social media profiles anymore. It's about using technology as a stage for your darkest impulses. It's about making your pain everyone else's problem. And sometimes, it's about announcing your intentions to commit the unthinkable before you actually do it. If you've ever wondered how far jealousy can push someone, you need to stay until the end of the story. Because what happened in Colbert, Georgia will challenge everything you think you know about love, obsession, and the deadly power of social media. This small town, nestled just west of the city limits and north of Georgia Highway 78, was about to become the backdrop for a tragedy that would leave investigators shaking their heads. A tragedy that started with a protection order, escalated through Facebook, and ended with 2 bodies on a living room floor. Colbert, Georgia had always been the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names, and the biggest news usually involved high school football scores. But on this particular Sunday, the tranquil streets of Brittany Point subdivision would be shattered by the sound of sirens and the weight of unspeakable loss. April Kelly, 45 years old, thought she had taken all the right steps to protect herself. She had filed the paperwork, obtained a restraining order, and moved in with family. She believed the law would keep her safe from her estranged husband's escalating threats. She was tragically wrong. April and Ricky Kelly weren't always a cautionary tale about love gone wrong. Like many couples in small-town Georgia, they had built what appeared to be a stable life together in their quiet Colbert neighborhood. April, at 45, was known by friends as a woman who tried to see the good in people, sometimes to her own detriment. Ricky, 48, had once been the kind of man who could make April laugh until her sides hurt. But somewhere along the way, that laughter had been replaced by walking on eggshells. The man who once brought her flowers began bringing her fear instead. Their marriage had become a battleground where love had been casualties, and control had become Ricky's primary weapon. The deterioration didn't happen overnight. Like most toxic relationships, it was a slow burn that gradually consumed everything good between them. Friends and family would later recall how Ricky's behavior had changed over the months leading up to the tragedy. What started as occasional jealousy over April's friendships had evolved into constant surveillance of her activities. He began questioning her every move, demanding to know where she was going and who she was talking to. April found herself making excuses for bruises that appeared after their arguments. She stopped seeing certain friends because Ricky didn't approve of them. The woman who once lit up rooms with her presence began withdrawing from social gatherings, always citing Ricky's need for her to be home. The escalation became impossible to ignore when Ricky's jealousy turned digital. He demanded access to April's phone, her social media accounts, and her email passwords. Every notification became a potential threat in his mind. A simple like on a friend's post would trigger hours of interrogation. A comment from a male colleague would result in screaming matches that left April emotionally drained. April's family began noticing the changes during holiday gatherings. She seemed nervous, constantly checking her phone and making excuses to leave early. When they asked if everything was okay, she would force a smile and insist that Ricky was just going through a rough patch at work. But the truth was becoming harder to hide with each passing week. The breaking point came when April finally found the courage to tell Ricky she needed space. The separation hit him like a physical blow, shattering whatever remained of his already fragile mental state. Friends would later describe how Ricky became obsessed with the idea that April was seeing someone else, despite having no evidence to support his paranoid theories. He began driving past her family's house at all hours, calling her phone dozens of times a day, and showing up at her workplace unannounced. April's co-workers grew concerned as they witnessed Ricky's increasingly erratic behavior. He would stand outside the building for hours, just watching and waiting. The man who once promised to love and protect her had become the very person she needed protection from. 2 weeks before that fatal Sunday, April made the decision that she hoped would save her life. With trembling hands, she filled out the paperwork for a temporary protection order against her husband of several years. The legal document felt both empowering and terrifying as she detailed Ricky's threatening behavior to the court clerk. When the deputy served Ricky with a restraining order, April told the officer she would be staying with her family for safety. She believed that piece of paper would create an invisible barrier between her and Ricky's rage. The protection order was supposed to keep him at least 300 feet away from her at all times. It was supposed to give her breathing room until their scheduled court hearing on October 21st, where they would address their grievances formally. That Sunday morning started like any other for April's family members as they scrolled through their Facebook feeds with their morning coffee. But what they discovered would haunt them forever. Ricky had posted a video that immediately sent alarm bells ringing through their minds. The content was so disturbing, so filled with raw emotion and barely contained rage, that they knew something terrible was about to happen. In the video, Ricky's voice carried a tone they had never heard before, a mixture of desperation, anger, and finality that made their stomachs drop. His words weren't just those of a heartbroken man. They were the ramblings of someone who had already made a decision that couldn't be undone. Social media has transformed the way we express our deepest emotions, but it has also created a dangerous platform for people in crisis to broadcast their intentions. What once would have been private thoughts scribbled in a diary or shared with a close friend can now reach hundreds of people instantly. For someone like Ricky, Facebook became both a confessional booth and a stage for his final performance.
And for the record, the TPO did it. You let me know you really don't give a fuck about me. And I should have known, because we live in the same house. We don't talk. You work your job all fucking day. You come home, don't say shit to me. Nothing. You don't cook for me. You don't even ask me how my day went. Nothing. But everybody at your job, you was all for that shit. All for that shit. You was all for your job. Back when we did used to talk, you come home from work complaining about your job and how the kids were so unruly and disrespectful, and just, if you didn't want to be married, just say that. Just say that. I needed a wife. I wanted a wife. That's why I married you. I wanted a wife. But it's so easy for you to bail on me when times got rough. So easy. I was willing to stick it out and do whatever I had to do to try to keep things going. But you let your mama get in your ear, and your aunties get in your ear. I mean, I hate that this had to happen. I hate it. But you're not finna leave me messed up like this and bail out. Yeah, the house is in my name only because her credit was messed up. Well, she done messed it up again, even worse. I got in debt, dealing with our grandkids' mama trying to put a roof over her head, and she go and messed the little apartment up over there off of Lob Lolly. Messed it up and beat the apartment up and left, and all that shit is on her for trying to help her. And don't get me wrong, we both love them grandkids. But at the same time, we wanted our son to be a man and handle his business. Because he made them, not us. But I just want to say to my kids, I love y'all, man. I know some of y'all going to be, a little mad at me for this, but that was my wife. Husband and wife supposed to be number one to each other. And then you want to leave me? Till death do us part.
The video wasn't just a cry for help. It was a public declaration of his mental state. Every word, every gesture, every pause carried the weight of a man who felt he had nothing left to lose. His family members recognized the signs immediately, understanding that this wasn't just another emotional outburst, but something far more dangerous. Psychologists have long studied why people choose to make their private pain public, especially in moments of extreme distress. For abusers like Ricky, social media posts serve multiple purposes. Their attempts to control the narrative, garner sympathy, and sometimes even justify their upcoming actions. The public nature of the platform gives them a sense of power when they feel powerless in their personal relationships. When someone posts their darkest thoughts online, they're often seeking validation for feelings they know are wrong. They want others to see their pain and understand why they're about to do something unforgivable. It's a twisted form of seeking permission from the world to commit acts they've already decided to carry out. Have you ever posted something in anger that you later regretted? Let me know in the comments. Most of us have shared heated thoughts online during emotional moments, but for people in abusive relationships, these digital outbursts often serve as warning signs of escalating violence. What makes Ricky's case particularly tragic is how his Facebook post became a real-time countdown to disaster. Domestic violence experts recognize this pattern all too well. When abusers feel they're losing control over their victims, they often turn to public forums to reassert their dominance. The post becomes their way of saying, "If I can't have you, no one can," while simultaneously painting themselves as the victim of circumstances beyond their control. This digital escalation represents a dangerous evolution in domestic violence patterns. Traditional warning signs like isolation, threats, and physical abuse now extend into the online realm where abusers can stalk, harass, and intimidate their victims 24 hours a day. Social media platforms become weapons of psychological warfare, allowing abusers to monitor their victims' every interaction and relationship. For April's family, that Facebook video was the final piece of a horrifying puzzle they had been watching come together for months. They understood that Ricky had crossed a line from which there was no return. The urgency in their voices as they called each other, the panic as they realized what the video meant, and their desperate race to Brittany Point. All of it stemmed from recognizing the deadly intent behind his digital confession. October 21st loomed on the calendar like a storm cloud gathering strength. This wasn't just another date circled in red ink. It was the day Ricky and April Kelly were scheduled to appear before a judge to address their grievances formally. For April, this court hearing represented hope for a legal resolution that would finally give her the protection she desperately needed. For Ricky, however, the approaching date felt like a countdown to his complete loss of control. Every day that passed brought him closer to facing a judge who would likely extend April's protection order permanently, cementing their separation in the eyes of the law. As the court date approached, Ricky's behavior became increasingly erratic and desperate. Friends and neighbors noticed him pacing his yard at odd hours, talking to himself, and displaying the kind of agitation that comes from a man who feels the walls closing in around him. The legal system that April hoped would protect her had become, in Ricky's mind, the enemy that was stealing his wife away from him. He began making phone calls to anyone who would listen, trying to convince them that April was being manipulated by her family. His version of events painted him as the victim of a conspiracy designed to destroy his marriage and his life. April had done everything the domestic violence advocates told her to do. She had documented Ricky's threats, gathered evidence of his harassment, and followed every legal procedure to the letter. The temporary protection order felt like a shield between her and his escalating anger. She believed that the court system would see the truth of her situation and grant her the permanent protection she needed. But restraining orders are just pieces of paper, and they only work when the person they're meant to restrain respects the law. For someone like Ricky, who felt he had already lost everything that mattered, legal consequences seemed insignificant compared to his burning need for control. The tragic reality about protection orders is that they often provide victims with a false sense of security. While they serve as important legal tools and can deter some abusers, they cannot physically prevent someone determined to cause harm. April's family had encouraged her to take this legal step, believing it would keep her safe until the court hearing could establish more permanent boundaries. Statistics show that the most dangerous time for domestic violence victims is often when they attempt to leave their abusers or seek legal intervention. The period between filing for protection and the actual court hearing creates a window of vulnerability that predators like Ricky often exploit. That Sunday morning, just days before their scheduled court appearance, something inside Ricky finally snapped. The combination of the looming legal consequences, his inability to contact April directly, and his growing paranoia about what she might tell the judge created a perfect storm of rage and desperation. The court date that was supposed to bring resolution had instead become the catalyst for tragedy. April woke up that morning believing she had just a few more days to endure before the legal system would grant her the permanent protection she sought. She had no way of knowing that Ricky had already decided the court would never get that chance. The notification alert on their phones seemed innocent enough at first, just another Facebook update from a family member. But as April's relatives watched Ricky's video unfold on their screens, the color drained from their faces. His words weren't just concerning. They carried the unmistakable tone of someone who had made peace with doing something terrible. Within minutes, family members were frantically calling each other, sharing screenshots and voice messages filled with panic. "Did you see what Ricky posted?" became the urgent question passed from phone to phone. The video's content was so alarming that nobody wanted to make the decision alone about what to do next. They knew they had to act quickly, but none of them were prepared for what they would find. The family held a hurried conference call that felt more like a crisis intervention meeting. April's sister spoke first, her voice shaking as she described the look in Ricky's eyes during the video. Her brother chimed in, expressing concern about specific phrases Ricky had used that sounded like goodbye messages rather than cries for help. They tried calling April's phone repeatedly, but each attempt went straight to voicemail. The silence on the other end felt ominous, especially given the timing of Ricky's disturbing post. Someone suggested calling the police immediately, but others argued they should check on the situation first to avoid potentially escalating things unnecessarily. After 20 minutes of debate filled with growing dread, they made the decision that would haunt them forever. The drive to Brittany Point felt like the longest journey of their lives. April's brother and sister-in-law led the convoy of concerned family members, their hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly their knuckles turned white. The subdivision that had once felt like a peaceful retreat now seemed ominous as they turned onto the familiar street. As they pulled into the driveway of the house where April and Ricky had built their life together, an unsettling quiet greeted them. No cars were visible in the driveway, but that didn't necessarily mean anything. The windows were dark and the curtains were drawn tight, giving the house an abandoned appearance that made their stomachs churn with anxiety. They approached the front door with hesitant steps, calling out April's name as they knocked. The sound echoed hollowly through what seemed like an empty house. They tried the doorknob, but it was locked tight. Moving around to the back door, they found the same result. Every entrance was secured from the inside. The family members exchanged worried glances as they peered through windows, trying to catch a glimpse of movement inside. The silence was deafening, broken only by their increasingly frantic calls for April and Ricky to answer. After several minutes of unsuccessful attempts to gain entry peacefully, they made the decision to force their way inside. April's brother found a sturdy piece of patio furniture and prepared to break down the door. The door gave way with a splintering crash that seemed to echo through the entire neighborhood. As they stepped inside, the first thing that hit them was the overwhelming silence, not the peaceful quiet of an empty home, but the heavy, suffocating stillness that follows tragedy. They called out again, their voices now carrying a desperate edge as they moved through the entryway. The living room came into view, and that's when their worst fears became reality. April lay motionless on the floor, a gunshot wound to her head, making it clear that their frantic race to save her had come too late. The scene before them was so shocking that for a moment, nobody could speak or move. Just a few feet away from April's body, they found Ricky. He too had suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the head, and beneath his lifeless form lay a Ruger P96 pistol, the weapon that had ended both their lives. The positioning of the bodies and the gun told a story that no family member wanted to accept, but the evidence was undeniable. The living room that had once hosted family gatherings and holiday celebrations had become a crime scene frozen in time. Personal belongings were scattered around the room, suggesting there had been some kind of struggle or confrontation before the final, tragic moments. The family members stood in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process the horror they had discovered. One of the family members managed to dial 911 with trembling fingers, their voice barely coherent as they tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher. Within minutes, the quiet Brittany Point subdivision was flooded with emergency vehicles, their flashing lights casting red and blue shadows across the neighborhood. Madison County Sheriff's deputies arrived first, followed quickly by paramedics who could only confirm what the family already knew. They were too late. Captain Jimmy Patton took charge of the scene, his experienced eyes taking in the details that would help investigators piece together the final moments of April and Ricky's lives. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation was called in to process the crime scene with their forensics unit. Captain Jimmy Patton had seen his share of domestic violence cases during his years with the Madison County Sheriff's Office, but the scene at Brittany Point would stay with him long after the investigation closed. As he walked through the house, documenting every detail, the evidence painted a clear and tragic picture of what had transpired in those final moments. The investigation revealed that both April and Ricky had been at the house when the confrontation occurred, though investigators were still working to determine exactly when each had arrived. What was certain was that their separation had not provided the safety April had desperately sought. The protection order that was supposed to keep Ricky away had failed in the most devastating way possible, becoming nothing more than a piece of paper against a man consumed by rage and desperation. The physical evidence at the scene left little doubt about what had occurred. Autopsies were ordered for both victims, but Captain Patton told reporters that everything pointed to a murder-suicide scenario. The positioning of the bodies, the location of the weapon, and the forensic evidence all supported the conclusion that Ricky had taken his wife's life before turning the gun on himself. The Ruger P96 found beneath Ricky's body had been fired twice, once into April's head as she stood in the living room, and once into his own. There were no signs of forced entry beyond what the family members had done to gain access, suggesting that April had either let Ricky into the house, or that he had used a key he still possessed from their marriage. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation's forensics team spent hours meticulously processing the crime scene, photographing every angle and collecting evidence that would help confirm the sequence of events. Their analysis supported the sheriff's initial assessment. This was a domestic violence case that had escalated to its most tragic conclusion. The forensic experts examined gunshot residue patterns, blood spatter evidence, and the trajectory of the bullets to reconstruct the final moments. Their findings indicated that April had likely been facing Ricky when he fired the fatal shot, suggesting there may have been a final confrontation or conversation before he pulled the trigger. The evidence showed no signs that April had been able to defend herself or escape, reinforcing how quickly and decisively Ricky had acted once he made his final, irreversible decision. The temporary protection order that April had filed just 2 weeks earlier became a haunting reminder of the limitations of the legal system in protecting domestic violence victims. While the document had legally prohibited Ricky from contacting or approaching April, it had no power to physically prevent him from carrying out his deadly intentions. Domestic violence advocates often refer to this as the paper barrier problem. Restraining orders can be effective deterrents for some abusers, but they cannot stop someone who has already decided that the consequences no longer matter. The scheduled court hearing for October 21st, where their grievances were to be formally addressed, would never take place. Instead of appearing before a judge to seek permanent protection, April had become another statistic in the tragic reality that the most dangerous time for abuse victims is when they try to leave. The impact on the Colbert community was immediate and profound. Neighbors who had lived peacefully on Brittany Point for years suddenly found themselves questioning how well they really knew the people around them. The quiet subdivision where children rode bicycles and families barbecued in their backyards had become the site of an unthinkable tragedy that shattered everyone's sense of security. Local domestic violence organizations reported an increase in calls from women seeking help in the days following the murder-suicide.
Oh, and another thing. Someone please let Robbie Falls, married to Charles Falls, let Robbie know that her husband, Charles Falls, aka Mr. Chunky, been fucking Joyce Cooper for many, many years behind her back. Peace.
April's story had become a stark reminder that abuse can escalate without warning, and that even taking legal precautions doesn't guarantee safety. The community rallied around April's surviving family members, but nothing could fill the void left by her senseless death or ease the trauma of discovering her body in such horrific circumstances. April Kelly's tragic death serves as a devastating reminder that domestic violence can escalate without warning, but there are signs that loved ones and victims themselves can learn to recognize. Excessive jealousy, like Ricky displayed over April's social media interactions, is often one of the earliest red flags. When a partner demands passwords to your accounts, monitors your every move, or becomes enraged over innocent conversations with others, these behaviors signal dangerous levels of control that frequently escalate to physical violence. Other critical warning signs include isolation tactics, where abusers systematically cut their victims off from friends and family, threats of suicide or violence when the relationship is threatened, and stalking behaviors like showing up at workplaces unannounced. The period when a victim tries to leave, as April experienced, is statistically the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship. Studies show that 75% of domestic violence homicides occur when the victim is attempting to leave or has recently left their abuser. Taking threats seriously can literally save lives. When someone like Ricky posts disturbing content on social media or makes verbal threats about harming themselves or others, these should never be dismissed as empty words or attention-seeking behavior. April's family recognized the danger in Ricky's Facebook video, but tragically, their intervention came too late. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong or dangerous, it probably is. For those currently in abusive relationships, resources are available 24 hours a day. The National Domestic Violence Hotline can be reached at 1-800-799-7233, and they provide confidential support, safety planning, and connections to local resources. Many communities also have women's shelters and legal advocacy programs that can help victims navigate protection orders and court proceedings safely. If you suspect someone you know is being abused, approach them with compassion rather than judgment. Don't demand they leave immediately or criticize them for staying. Leaving an abusive relationship is incredibly complex and dangerous. Instead, let them know you're concerned, that the abuse isn't their fault, and that you're available to help when they're ready. Keep detailed records of any threats or incidents they share with you, as this documentation can be crucial for legal proceedings. Remember that restraining orders, while important legal tools, are not foolproof protection. Victims need comprehensive safety plans that include secure housing, financial resources, and strong support networks. The legal system alone cannot solve domestic violence. It requires community awareness, intervention, and long-term support for survivors. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to help us reach others who might need to hear these important safety messages. Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. Your engagement helps ensure that stories like April's reach people who might recognize themselves in similar situations and seek help before it's too late.